Look around this room. This is our first national gathering, and so as Nancy Barron, one of our panelists this morning, said, clearly there's an industry here. Clearly there is a movement here. So thank you all for being part of it. Thank you all for contributing to the success of supportive housing nationally. So before we get started, there's a couple things I want to announce. How about a big shout out to the mobile app? All right, if you're like me, you're using the mobile app and you still have the paper in your bag or your pocket, and that's okay. When we do this again, I want you all to just use the mobile app. But kudos to staff that created the app. And if you're having any problems with it, you can, at the information table, just talk to one of the CSHers out there, and they'll help you with it. So registration is going to be open all day. If you haven't registered and you snuck into breakfast, that's fine, but just go back out to registration. We asked you all through the mobile app or online to register for your sessions in advance of coming here. If something has changed for you, please see a CSHer and they'll take care of that for you. We're doing some new and exciting things at the summit, and our sponsors have really stepped up. So we're going to have fireside chats and lounges and innovation labs. And I encourage you all to avail yourselves of those opportunities because I think it's going to be really interesting. So let me also just a big thank you to Marriott. They've been a wonderful host and have been providing us everything we've asked for. And if you need anything, just let them know. So this. So first, a big thank you to our sponsors. We have a number of sponsors. They've been tremendous in their support. So thank you to United Healthcare, BB&T, Butler, Foothold, Goldman Sachs, Home Depot, Kresge, Volunteers of America, Collaborative Solutions, Enterprise, Great Lakes, HSBC, NEF and LISC, Nixon Peabody, Ohio Capital Corp., and the Richmond Group. Please join me in applauding our sponsors. So raise your hands if this is the first time you've been to Chicago. Wow. All right, this is the closest you're going to get to seeing Chicago while you're here. Because we are going to keep you sequestered for the next 2.5 days. No, I'm just kidding. We picked Chicago because we thought, in addition to spending time all together in the big rooms and the breakout sessions, that it would be a great place for you to go and have fun. So I encourage you to spend money in Chicago and really enjoy yourself. So why are we here? I'll let you in on a little secret. This is probably the most expensive strategic planning process that any organization will ever go through. So you are here to work. So CSH is developing our next 3-year strategic plan, and it comes at a time where clearly supportive housing is widely embraced, seen as an effective intervention for vulnerable populations. It's at a time when more sectors are expressing interest in learning more about supportive housing, looking at best practices, what's going on around the country that can be replicated locally. So we've brought you all together to really learn from you, to give you an opportunity to learn from others, share your knowledge. And again, we are going to use it for our strategic planning process, so we will give it back out to you. So CSH has been around for 20+ years. We didn't create supportive housing. I like to think that we nurtured supportive housing. And we did that by working with all of you around the country, taking what was working, what you were innovating locally, and replicating it and exporting it in other places. So taking what's working well in Houston and sharing it with our good friends in Florida. Taking what's working really well in Los Angeles and sharing it with our friends in Utah. So it only works because you have been so generous to share with us what you have learned over time. And collectively, I think we have really improved the model of supportive housing. But we're here at a time where we're reflecting on how successful we've been in ending chronic homelessness. More importantly, what work is ahead of us. And in addition to that, we're here at a time where people are understanding that supportive housing, the model of supportive housing, has a much broader application. That supportive housing can work for people who are exiting jails and prisons, for families that are involved in the child welfare system, for that youth that's exiting the foster care system, in addition to people who have been experiencing chronic homelessness. And actually at CSH, several years ago, we said, all right, we set a goal a long time ago, let's create 150,000 units of supportive housing. We hit that goal in 10 years, and then we looked around and we said, people are still experiencing chronic homelessness. There's still a shortage of housing around the nation. So supportive housing works for those who are most vulnerable. What's missing from the equation? And what we determined was what was missing was there weren't enough partners at the table. That the very large systems that every day were doing very hard work, corrections and child welfare as examples, didn't see themselves as part of the solution. And so we've invited you here today, and this group here is really a cross-section of different systems and organizations around the countries. We have providers and developers and government agencies and folks from child welfare and folks from the homeless system, folks from corrections. So we've invited you here today to really advance this conversation about for whom supportive housing makes sense and what we need to be thinking about as we advance supportive housing for an effective intervention. So here's my challenge to all of you. While you're here, I want you to connect to new ideas and people you've never met before. If you are a child welfare worker, I want you to meet folks from corrections. If you're someone from the continuum of care, I want you to meet one of our friends from the public housing authorities. This is your opportunity to connect the dots, and that's what we hope to get out of this. We want this network to grow, so the next time we do this, the room gets bigger, but more importantly, we've created the infrastructure so that we can work together. One of my personal goals is I don't want to go out to any more convenings and talk about the importance of collaboration. I just want it to be a given. We all know how to collaborate, and we all know how to talk the same language. So that's where we want to get to. So that's your challenge. Make the most of these 2 days. And I want to tell you that we very much value your feedback. So if something worked for you, please let us know. If something didn't work for you, please let us know. Because we do take seriously that we are a learning organization, and we want to improve how we share knowledge with you and how we learn from your efforts as well. So with that, this morning I am joined by a group of individuals. I'm going to invite you on up. And we're going to talk about the future of supportive housing. So we've invited several of our partners. Nancy Barron from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, David Fukasawa from the Kresge Foundation, and Michelle Norris with National Church Residences, Bill Pitkin from Hilton, and Dr. Arthur Evans from the city of Philadelphia. And we're just going to have a conversation, and it's okay if they disagree with each other. And we're going to get from them their insights about where they think the supportive housing industry is headed. So let's start with a real simple question, and I'm going to ask you to, each of you, to tell us about the role supportive housing plays in your work. So maybe we'll start with you, Nancy.
Sure. Well, thank you. And welcome. It's wonderful to be here and to feel the energy in the room and to look out and really see that field and that industry that's developed. So when I think about the role of supportive housing at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, it goes pretty far back. And I'm going to give you a brief history in time, a whirlwind tour, because I think that it's an interesting story, and I think that there are some lessons there for philanthropy about how we think about innovation and how we nurture it. So a little bit of patience. In the mid-'80s, we started a program called Healthcare for the Homeless. We brought primary care into shelters, and that was good. It was successful, but it was not enough. So we started a program called the Program for Chronic Mental Illness, and we used assertive community treatment teams to go out on the street and work with homeless people to provide mental health care and substance abuse treatment. And that was good, and that was successful, but it also wasn't enough. And we realized we needed to help these people find housing because it was not a stable population. And we started to explore how to do that. And the next program, Healthcare for Homeless Families, we actually worked with state housing authorities to use vouchers to place families into housing and then to bring the services to them, and that was good, and that was successful. But again, it wasn't enough. We couldn't scale that program. And in 1990, Steve Summers at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Michael Rubinger, then at Pew, and Bob Curvin, then at Ford Foundation, came together, collaborated to help create the Corporation for Supportive Housing, which now so many other funders are collaborating on. And we did that to develop and promote the concept of supportive housing. And that was good, and that was very successful. But by the late 90s, we realized we needed a more sustainable financing stream for the services. And so we worked with CSH to develop something called the HISN model. I don't know how many people here remember that. Health, Housing, and Integrated Service Network. And that was really an early attempt to look at whether or not we could develop a capitated product for Medicaid, a Medicaid managed care product. And that was good, but it was not successful, except in the sense that it started those early conversations between Medicaid and supportive housing and started to think about how those two fields might be able to come together. As we moved into the early 2000s, the foundation was focusing on chronic illness. And what came out of that HISN model is really the ability to look more closely at the population of people who are homeless for a long period of time. And we started to define that population as the chronically homeless, and we took out a program called Taking Healthcare Home to try to eliminate chronic homelessness. And that program was good, and it was very successful. And we saw a major reduction in chronic homelessness, but we couldn't stem the tide of people coming into chronic homelessness. So we asked whether or not we could take supportive housing upstream and use it as a preventive measure. And as Deb has already mentioned, we started to look at whether or not it was an innovation that could be used to stem the cycle of recidivism, of people coming in and out of our jails and prisons with mental illness. And we also began to look at whether or not we could end that cycle of foster care into chronic homelessness by using supportive housing as a way to stabilize dysfunctional families and break that generational cycle. And both those programs continue today and are good and are successful, and I would say are on their way to being enough. But there is still so much more to do. And as we look at supportive housing today, we look at it being a potential solution for superutilizers in the healthcare system. We look at it as being ripe for all the pay-for-success opportunities that are out there. And I think you can see that as an innovation, supportive housing just keeps giving. It just keeps innovating. And I think that's the definition of a real game changer. So congratulations to everybody who has contributed to this field and this industry and this movement.
Great. Thank you, Nancy.
So good morning. I tried different ways of thinking about how to explain this. This is actually sort of the latest spin out of my head after listening to Nancy. So this is very impromptu, but I actually had something that I was more prepared to talk about. It's just that Kresge's been around for a very long time, and so I could easily just say, well, we've been doing supporting homeless services and housing for a long time just because we did bricks and mortar, but since 2007, we've actually been on this different course, as many of you probably know. And I thought that probably the simplest way to sort of give you an idea about where Kresge's at is just to talk a little bit about the foundation right now. We've taken this broad urban opportunity framework of increasing opportunity in America's cities. And internally, we talk about these major 4 fence posts around which we sort of organize ourselves. So one is opportunity, obviously. The other is places or cities. The third is multi-sectoral collaboration. And the fourth is impact investing. And we have 6 teams at Kresge, and I direct the health team, which is why I think I've been invited, because we have been in the sort of space around housing for a while since we started the effort. But increasingly what we're finding is that across all 6 teams, or maybe 5.5, housing has actually been a part of our work. And all this was without any kind of strategic impulse to go to housing. And so if you think about what's inside the 4 fence posts, there's actually not a lot that we all share, but housing is one of them. And as we look at the issue around housing, everything that Nancy said is true about that the supportive housing we recognize has incredible value, of not only addressing the issues around people who are chronically homeless or chronically ill or just out of luck, but it is a portal or a platform for multiple kinds of services. So that was becoming very clear as we're sort of thinking about that. But if you think about the whole area of housing by itself, there are many people who also live in substandard housing. And it's a tragedy in this society that we not only have a lack of enough decent and affordable housing, but that many people who have housing have housing that barely suits them. As many of you know, Freddie Gray was lead poisoned as a child in basically slum housing, and they won the suit, but he lost his life, I think, as a result of that. And for vast numbers of many people, for the middle class, there is this issue around just struggling to maintain affordability. And certainly in many of the big cities, there's pressure around housing, and it's barely, people are barely able to sort of maintain, their standard of life, given the rents and given mortgages and that kind of a thing. So displacement is rampant. Segregation is still, I think, a problem we have yet to face. And all these things prevent people from being socially mobile, that is, being able to move beyond themselves. So obviously, it intersects all these issues. And, as Nancy pointed out, housing, because it's real estate, and because there is an infrastructure of financing around this, and because the healthcare world is understanding that they don't deliver very good value. So the most expensive healthcare system in the world, and we're dead last among the rich countries in terms of outputs. So there is value to be found. And our sense about this is there's many places to find it, but housing is one place we have to begin. And that's where we think this issue around supportive housing, among other things, comes in.
Great, thank you, David. Bill?
Well, good morning. I guess this is kind of philanthropy row here. The Conrad Hilton Foundation, our mission is to, a charge from our founder is to help the most needy and vulnerable people throughout the world. And back in the crisis of homelessness during the 1980s, our board got interested in addressing, obviously, one of the most vulnerable populations in our society here. And so there was some research that was done. Our program officer at that time looked around for what could be done. He had a particular interest in helping people with mental illness and found this innovation happening called supportive housing and CSH, some of the history that Nancy told. And that program officer was Steve Hilton, who's now our CEO and grandson of Conrad Hilton. So the foundation has been involved in supportive housing early days. Early 1990s, had a long partnership with Corporation for Supportive Housing. Started in New York, some of the work there in partnership with some of the foundations that Nancy mentioned. And our approach for many years was finding a key partner, helping support them with multi-year funding, to test, to innovate, to scale up, to do the research, to do the technical assistance needed. So for a long time, our partnership with CSH has helped test that model with research and TA and things, help them expand throughout the country. And then over the last about 10 years, we've been focusing where we're headquartered in Los Angeles. So supportive housing is central to our approach to working to end particularly chronic homelessness. We remain very committed to that. I think kind of like you keep hearing about collaboration rather than just hearing about it. Again, supportive housing, the evidence is there. Our focus is primarily on scaling up and how do we work with these various systems and that Deb mentioned to help see how supporting housing and supportive housing is in their interest. And I think while at the same time being open and thinking about how does that model relate to these various populations coming from different systems, youth coming out of child welfare, et cetera. So it remains very a central part of our approach to working to end homelessness.
Great, thanks, Michelle.
Good morning. Well, I'm going to stop the philanthropy row here, though I will take your karma and any funds that you think would be good to deploy. National Church Residences, I guess to answer the first question about how significant it is or important is it in our work, I would say it's been a growing importance in our work over the last probably 10 to 15 years. Our organization is over 50 years old, and we spent almost all of our first 35 years focusing on senior housing, specifically with much of that target on the lower income folks. It was kind of how we grew our portfolio. We started with, about 20 years ago, growing our supportive housing, not really through what we would call supportive housing today, but when we layered service coordination on top of all of our housing. And suddenly we started looking and realizing that that connectivity, and that was mostly through HUD grants, became such a blessing to us because we realized that the housing with services model at that point around our seniors was so effective. And we could tell because we'd have some buildings that didn't have it and some buildings that did. Then what happened for us was very significant when our mayor and the leadership of our hometown, Columbus, Ohio, realized that they wanted to do something significant around the homeless situation in our own town. And they came to us, and I will say this is somewhat hearsay because it was our CEO who was the main leader when we started this initiative. He was a little surprised that he was brought to the table at the time. And he said, you know, we're really more about senior housing folks. Why would you approach us about the supportive housing around homeless? And the first answer was because we knew how to do development and we knew how to do long-standing development. And quite honestly, they were also selfish and said, you guys have been around a long time, you have financial stability, we need success, and we think that you can learn this model because you're already doing it in your senior housing. What became significant to us is we took 2 major trips with a lot of the leadership of our board and our city government to the town of Chicago and went to hang out with Lakefront SRO. I don't know if anybody's here from Lakefront. I suspect somebody's here from Lakefront SRO. Nobody? Well,
Nope,
right there. There you go. Thank you, because you started our portfolio. It was really amazing. It changed not only how the city was thinking, but how our board was thinking. And this became a new initiative for us. Now, 15 years later, we have 5 buildings in Columbus. We have 1 in Toledo that is almost finished. We have 1 starting in Cincinnati, we hope, soon. 1 in Atlanta. And it is about 50% of our construction now, new construction, is in supportive housing, focusing on homeless and other vulnerable populations. It's been such a significant thing for us philanthropically. It has been one of our biggest capital gifts we have received has been in our supportive housing compared to our senior housing, which is an interesting thing for me to look at. And it has caught the heart of our board. They just really believe that this is effective and really an amazing program. And so we're honored to be part of this growing network, and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Arthur.
First of all, thank you for inviting me. I have such great respect for CSH, both in my work in Connecticut and now in Philadelphia. The work that you all are doing, I think, is very important to our field, so I just want to publicly thank you for that. So in my role as Commissioner for the City of Philadelphia's Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, I am a public payer. We're responsible for 1.5 million people in the City of Philadelphia as a safety net, and about 500,000 people who we are capitated for through our Medicaid managed care program. And for us, it is all about, or a lot about, how do we get the health outcomes that we need as an agency? And the reality is we cannot get the health outcomes that we want, that we're trying to achieve, without thinking about and incorporating housing as a very fundamental part of that. If you look at what causes or what leads to our health status, clinical care is only about 10 to 20%. What drives our health outcomes, has to do with social determinants like where we live, work, and play. And I think for too long our field has focused so much on clinical care, ignoring all of the other things that impact on health outcomes. And as a result, we do spend more money than any place on in the planet, but we don't have the outcomes. And so I think for us, housing is one of those issues, one of those social determinants that's fundamental to us achieving the outcomes that we want. Increasingly, we've incorporated supportive housing. I have a great team of people that I work with. We partner with our sister city agency that is responsible for homelessness and housing services in the city. And as a result, we've been able to, in the last 3 years, get close to 600 people who were formerly homeless housed. And when you look at the numbers in terms of cost to my department, we have costs that were hovering around $100 per person per day. Now we're close to $20 per person per day. That is all the evidence I need as a public payer. And so we're really committed to this. We're starting to look at how we can bring supportive housing not only to people who are homeless and people who are in congregate care, but as you mentioned in your opening comments, across the whole spectrum of people that we have to serve in behavioral health.
So as you think about the future of supportive housing, Bill, what do you think are the greatest opportunities for the field?
I think, again, this issue of, as I said, we're trying to scale it. We're looking at, working with different systems. In Los Angeles, one thing we've been able to do is build a collaborative of funders. For a long time, LA was known as a place that didn't collaborate and coordinate, and the city and county didn't get along, et cetera, et cetera. Funders, talk nice to each other, but don't really put any money on the table together. So one thing we did is create this funders collaborative that the United Way manages. Hilton Foundation, our board, put forward a $1 million challenge grant and said we want philanthropy to come to the table, not just match it 1-to-1, 4-to-1. We need $4 million of other philanthropic dollars, and we expect that we'd get at least $30 million from the public sector as part of that. And to both, coordinate the money, but also the processes and make things easier, drive systems change. Well, it's been wildly successful in the sense that we've met those goals. I think around $18 million of private money over the last 4 years. We're in our fourth year. And literally hundreds of millions of dollars of public resources as housing authorities, county health and mental health departments have come to the table and dedicated resources. And the money is important and the coordination, but it's also the relationships that have happened. And so that's spawned other collaborations. A big partnership we have with the county health department, which has dedicated general fund health dollars to pay for housing. And there's a session after this that we're going to be talking about that with. So the opportunity is as sectors understand and coordination can happen, and it's risky, and there's questions about control, but people are concerned about, is this going to help my bottom line? Is it going to help people that we are charged with helping do better socially, health-wise, et cetera? And I think if you can find a way there's a piece for everybody, there can be shared understanding and data and evaluation and all that, it can work.
Is that the key, Bill? Making sure that there's a piece for everyone? What can folks take away from your model in LA? What do they need to do locally to replicate what you've been able to do in LA? Well,
I guess one thing I share, particularly with philanthropy, is put your money where your mouth is, in a sense. I mean, we've talked a lot about collaboration and coordination. People talk about it. It was not easy to convince our board to put out $1 million, saying, we hope we build it, will they come? It was a bit of a risk. And I think you have to be willing to take that risk and challenge people. And I think that generated, because literally it was 4 or 5 months by the time we made that challenge where we had meetings and people did put money on the table. So before that, we had been talking about it and drafting MOUs behind the scenes, but that can go on and on forever. So I think taking a risk is important.
Yeah, taking the risk, great. Other thoughts on what are the opportunities? Arthur?
I'd like to talk a little bit more about healthcare, because if I were in your shoes, I would be all over healthcare right now. And the reason is there is a ton of money in healthcare, and healthcare is really shifting to trying to do more value-based purchasing. And what that means is that increasingly healthcare systems are moving, and payers like myself are moving from a fee-for-service to paying for outcomes. And again, I think that when it comes to getting good outcomes, supportive housing is a slam dunk. And so I think that there are a lot of opportunities with healthcare reform, with payment reform, moving to outcomes-based payment structures. I think integrating supportive housing into those kinds of strategies like accountable care organizations and health homes, I think will help those organizations reach those outcomes. And I think you begin to make yourself indispensable in terms of supportive housing and being able to promote that as a model. So I think it's a huge opportunity.
Arthur, give me some free advice then. What can we do to make CMS embrace supportive housing the same way you have embraced it?
Well, this isn't going to be free, but let me tell you, since you asked. Since you asked. Well, I think it really comes down to how, and I think, it's both an opportunity, but I think there's a threat, okay? So the opportunity is clearly there in terms of cost savings. I think the threat is twofold. One is whether we will, in healthcare reform, move quickly enough around changing how we pay for services. And then the second thing is, will we fully embrace payment for outcomes as opposed to retreating back to a fee-for-service kind of system? I think the argument for CMS is that if they want to save money, this is the way to do it. And I understand that federal agencies don't want to pay for things that they think another federal agency should pay for. Someone has to reconcile that, because clearly housing is an important part of healthcare. So, you know, in Pennsylvania has a Medicaid managed care program that allows counties, and Philadelphia is both a county and a city, to use and reinvest surpluses back into the system. And the state has allowed us to use some of our surpluses to reinvest back into our service system. And so we've been able to create housing subsidies. That mechanism has worked, and because we were able to create those housing subsidies, as I mentioned earlier, we were able to get people who were formerly homeless or in congregate care into supportive housing. So I think there are ways to do it. I think CMS has to be a little more creative and flexible, but I think if the bottom line is cost savings, I think the evidence is there.
Right. David?
Yeah, I totally agree with Arthur. I think that what you all can do is just raise your voices, because even though sometimes CMS seems impervious to all of that, they are listening. They just feel constrained, let's say, to what they can do. But if they continue to hear things, I know for a fact that those bureaucrats are trying to move the needle in whatever way they can. So I think your voices are important. You know, I would just sort of add to that there is a larger pressure, not only around these high-cost patients, but there is, as I said before, there's a larger drive to find better value in many, many ways, and that housing by itself, you know, offers a near-term target of opportunity that doesn't exist in other places. I mean, you can build grocery stores and parks and that things in low-income neighborhoods, but you know, you're not going to get a decrease in obesity right away, but you can get a decrease in things like the high-cost patients, the dual eligibles, the homeless, the asthmatic kids, the lead-poisoned kids. You can get results immediately, and people are beginning to understand that, even at CMS. So people are thinking about those kinds of things. I would say the other opportunity is that, and many of you already know this, you know, it's not that we have no money. It's just that the money's in the wrong places. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of capital washing around. People are sitting on tons of cash, and it's not the government. Regardless of what Fox News says, it's not the government. There's a ton of cash out there, and they want to know what to do with it. And people are looking for ways to get, you know, real return. And believe it or not, people are thinking about, you know, how to do it through social enterprise. And, you know, again, just because there's an infrastructure around investing in this sector, and people with your experience and knowledge on how to get some of this stuff done, I think it creates an opportunity. So you have a health system that wants value, and you have investors that are looking for places to invest. And I think housing becomes a place that we can have kind of this, like, you know, intersection of interests. And I think it's on us to sort of figure that out.
Great. Michelle, I know you've given a lot of thought to this topic. How do you capture the savings in Medicaid and apply them to housing?
Well, I love this discussion because it's exactly where we are as a practitioner. And we are finding it quite exciting and quite frustrating at the same time. Mm-hmm. We are trying to do this in both our platforms of supportive housing and our senior housing platform. On the senior housing side, we have a lot of those dual eligibles. They're sitting in our buildings. And so, right, the logic thing is, oh my goodness, if I have 50% of my building is full of duals, wouldn't you think that would be a slam dunk for people to bring services or pay for the healthcare side to come to my building and provide some services? Mm-hmm. It makes sense. And it also makes sense on my supportive housing side, where we have now Medicaid expansion in our state, well, at least for now. Yeah, anybody from Ohio, keep making sure you put pressure on the administration to keep that expansion going. Thank you. Thank you, Ohioans. All right.
I think it was 3 people, so yeah, get more people to come to this.
We need more people from Ohio, but we're trying to get Californians because they don't have any water, so we're trying to get them, because we got the Great Lakes, so. Anyway, so we are looking at that, and we also, because we have nursing home side and assisted living, we're now entering into those bundled payment programs. And so we're seeing this from all sides, that the whole philosophy of pay for performance and bundled payments, it's all out there, but what I also see is a tremendous amount of confusion. There is so much desperation on the healthcare side to save money, and they're trying to figure out where they can find it, and it's hard to find it. Everything's experimental. On the bundled payments, we're just now signing up for stuff like on our nursing home side for replacing for hip replacement. That's our bundle payment we picked. Well, they're giving us like 3 years to show out anything, any results before they decide to take the next step, to go from a hip to a knee to an ankle. So there is a lot of time that we're going to have this confusion. And so I think one of the things that tells us is that we've got a lot of opportunities. We're going to have to find partners that are ready and have some specific needs, and we're going to have to be ready, have to go after them. Great example for us is one of our most recent supportive housing projects that is actually 3 different populations. One is our homeless population that came from our continuum. One is folks that were not elderly, but under the non-elder disabled that were in nursing homes that didn't need to be. So bring them out of the institutional setting, and then also from group homes out. Now why? Because there was a period of time when our state government was trying to make some major impact on moving people out of institutional settings. But then we also had to turn around and provide data back. So it's all happening, but it's somewhat opportunistic at the time until we can really get some patterns that people will start to really divert money to. I think we need to be very nimble for a while.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think we've heard from each of the panelists the opportunities that have been created by the incentives in the healthcare system, but also by this new movement of pay for success, paying for outcomes, paying for what works, at its essence, paying for prevention. And I think that supportive housing is perfectly set up to take advantage of that. It's almost as if supportive housing were tailored to pay for success, or maybe pay for success was tailored to supportive housing. That evidence base that you've all been building is critical. This is the way not to just assume the potential of cost savings from prevention, but pay for success provides us a way with actually being able to recognize that in the budgets and capture it and use it to pay for those services going forward. I think that supportive housing not only has an opportunity, but really needs to step into that space, as you are doing, and make it your own. You can actually, I think, lead in what we know can work for pay for success.
Yeah, interestingly, we do the industry survey every year, and one of the questions we asked was about pay for success. And much to my surprise, we had overwhelming response that folks said in their communities pay for success was being talked about, and there was interest in pursuing pay for success, and that there was an acknowledgement that the greatest need was technical assistance around pay for success. Bill?
I just want to highlight another opportunity that I think mentioned, but I mean, certainly the healthcare system, that's one system and sector we've been working a lot with, but criminal justice. I mean, there's a national conversation around criminal justice reform. We can't build more prisons. That's not the solution. And we see this in California. A lot of people being released out of state prisons, and I think that's an opportunity. And it's the trick is, and talk about a system that's health system is one thing, criminal justice system is another thing in terms of working with and language and understanding. But does supportive housing have a role in reducing recidivism? There's cost elements, but also other personal and community outcomes. So Robert Johnson's been working on this for a while, and others, and our partner in CSH on people that are chronically homeless or will become chronically homeless. We've recently developed a partnership with our probation department, so people who who've been on probation from prison, we're testing out. It's new to see how can we intervene with housing and some support. The key is what level of support is needed, and I think that conversation provides an opportunity.
Great. Any other thoughts on opportunities? David?
Can I just mention
Sure.
really quick? So I want to go back to our example, if I can, really quick.
Sure.
And if anybody wants, want to give a shout out to Colleen Bain, who's sitting over there, who's actually running this property. So if you want more information about it. But our outcomes on this property, where we had the 3 different populations that we're serving, part of that was driven thanks to Kresge, who gave us a grant to spend 3 years, instead of the pay for success model, it was kind of the precursor to pay for success. Right. And it took, we're now on the 2nd year. We've learned a lot, and one of the things we've learned is it takes a while for outcomes to happen. So I think one of our messages that we need to have out there is when you do pay for success, you have to have some time. People are pretty, impatient sometimes of, I want to see an answer in 6 months or in a year. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer. I think it's a really important point for us to have out there.
Right. Any additional thoughts, David?
This is, as you all know, because you're all out there doing this work, we've gotten well beyond supportive housing just for those that are chronically homeless, that there's a lot of other folks that that could benefit from some kind of housing-affiliated services. And we supported a pilot with Open Society on a host program, which is around families. And I think that, so broadly speaking, and this may be, too far on the horizon, but I think it's important because if we really think about all these issues around, educational outcomes and success and families and social mobility, we become much more aware that it's really rooted in people's ability to sort of stay in stable, safe, decent housing. And if you talk to any school administrator, any K-12 administrator, they will tell you that aside from the issues in the classroom, that if kids can't be in stable housing, this is a problem. And to the extent that we can, sort of extend the model to sort of think about a lot of communities and sort of how do we get people in stable housing, we can actually reduce, sort of the amount of trauma. I mean, the kinds of experiences that kids have at an emotional level, is being compared to sort of, trauma. It is traumatic, and many of you have heard of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. These are all kind of coming now into the lexicon and understanding of what contributes to a successful life. And so I think there's a place there somewhere.
Okay. So let's talk about research and evaluation. How important has research been in advancing the field? And then what do you think the gaps are that currently exist in research? Anyone?
I'll just, I think, we've talked a lot about cost savings. That's where a lot of the research has been. And we continue to, we do another study and see, yes, there's cost savings and it's this amount. It's still important. I think different systems need to be convinced often, so you need to do that. We had a convening recently of researchers in Los Angeles that are working in various aspects of homelessness, and the consensus was we've got a lot of those, but we don't have much understanding. The gap is what are the health outcomes, the social outcomes, et cetera. A lot less data and understanding there, and I think that's what we need. I mean, we think it's true. Right. People aren't going to the ER or have less inpatient days. They're doing better health-wise. But how is it? What does that mean? And so I think that there's, hopefully some of the stuff we're supporting Los Angeles will help answer some of those questions. But I think that's one of the biggest gaps.
Okay.
Well, I think clearly the research is there that shows the importance of supportive housing. I think that the questions now, I think, are about what works best for which people. I'll give you an example. So one of the issues that have come up in our work with working with people who are chronically homeless is whether Housing First works with people who have substance use disorders, really serious substance use disorders. And so we did a pilot. We did a pilot, Pathways to Housing of Pennsylvania did a pilot with us, and we found that it does work for a certain group of people. Another group of people doesn't really work that well. And so I think what we're trying to do in Philadelphia is to have multiple pathways into supportive housing, from harm reduction to traditional abstinence-based recovery programs. And the question, the empirical question is, well, which one of those pathways works best for which people? The way we deal with that now is we really look at choice and what is it that people want. And if we ask people what they want, they're usually pretty good at figuring out what's the pathway that's going to work for them. But I think to the extent that we have some evidence about which characteristics fit best with which pathway, I think that that would be a very important question for the field, at least for the behavioral health field.
Mm-hmm. Nancy?
So I agree that the research is critical for the credibility, for the validity, for the evidence that's needed to be able to measure the cost savings, to be able to know the target populations. I guess I'd just like to throw out there, at some point I'd like to see more research on the spillover effects of supportive housing in scattered site housing. The spillover effects not only to other tenants in affordable housing, but the external, the positive externalities of supportive housing in a neighborhood, in a community. Mm-hmm. What does that stability of housing mean in the broader context of that neighborhood and community, and for others who may benefit from it in ways that we don't know? What does that stability mean in terms of school attendance, in terms of the health of the community? I think that there's a lot there that we could learn from with supportive housing.
Interesting. David, any thoughts?
The one thing that I've been thinking about anyway, which sort of relates to supportive housing, is why do we, why do we have the problem to begin with? And I only say that because from the health program point of view, we actually started with the issue around substandard housing, and realized that there was this relationship, and it's been studied, but it's not something that people connect. So people want to respond to issues around homelessness, or they want to respond to issues around affordability, but they don't think of it in sort of a systemic way. So that's something that I've been interested, that I think we need to understand better, just because I think that how we think about housing in this country is deeply related to the issues that you're all dealing with. And we'll never get ahead of the issue unless we can some way prevent it. Now, some of it can't be prevented, I understand, but because there's deep behavioral issues, but a lot of it is being driven underneath by what's happening in how we view housing. As you all know, it's a very fragmented system, and as we think in this country about issues around income inequality and opportunity, I think we're going to have to think about, what is it about our housing that is driving that problem?
Great. So Arthur, CSH for several years now has been leading a national initiative, Social Innovation Fund, and the goal is to house a little over 500 individuals, high utilizers. And so we have some preliminary findings from that work, and one of the things that just jumped out at me, screamed at me, was one of the characteristics of the population. And over 88% of the people involved in this initiative reported a history of drug use, substance use. So thinking about your work locally in Philadelphia and I think how you've really gone out that multi-system approach, what do we need to do to get addictive services or the substance use advocates to the table to be part of this conversation?
Do I get paid for this one too?
Yeah, yeah. I might pay you for this one, actually.
Just checking. I'm giving a lot of good advice here. Well, I think, I think it's, back to what we had talked about earlier. I think that if they want to be effective, particularly, I think it's more of a question with the payers and getting the payers to provide leverage. You know, because I am a payer, we are able to use that leverage to have those conversations about the importance of those kinds of partnerships. We have, for example, and one of the programs I'm going to talk about later in the next session is a program called Journey of Hope, which is a residential treatment program. So we had residential providers. We're one of the few places in the country where our residential we have excess residential capacity. We actually had some providers who had more capacity than people in the beds. And so we went to them and said, look, we think we can help you fill your beds because we have this other issue of people who are chronically homeless, who are going to traditional addictions treatment programs. Because those programs are not responsive, people leave within a week back to the streets. And if you're willing to change how you do business, we think we can fill the programs. We were able to take those programs, essentially re-engineered them. Now, we as a payer made sure that as they were going through the transition process, that they were held harmless from a financial standpoint. So they didn't lose any money by making the transition. Once they made the transition, they were back into traditional fee-for-service. Those programs are 100% full all the time. We've been able to graduate over close to about 500 people over the last several years, which is about 6 years. They are doing well financially because of that. We solved the problem as a payer because we were able to get people who had historically gone to traditional programs, not worked well, into those programs, get them some good stability, and then move them into supportive housing. So it was really a win-win-win situation. And I think for addictions providers, and I was one, so I can say this, providers can be pretty parochial, and they can be very, have some very strong philosophical views. I think that increasingly, because of the changes in healthcare, people are going to have to move from that. But I really do think that the leverage with the payer is a part of the answer, a big part of the answer for those who aren't quite there yet.
Great. Hey, Bill, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about the work that you're spearheading for Hilton around leadership development and involving tenants as advocates.
Sure. You know, one of the things, so the last few years, I mean, it seems like a simple thing we should always be aware of, but sometimes as professionals, we kind of think, well, we understand these issues, we're going to talk to our grantees, et cetera. One of the things we did as part of our evaluation, that we have a team from App Associates that's helping us evaluate and, more importantly, learn from our initiative. And data-wise, but also just what are the processes that are happening in terms of our efforts. So one thing we asked them to do was to do some focus groups with residents of supportive housing. So they've done it over the last few years to hear from them. What's working, what are the challenges, to learn from, how did they overcome their homelessness, et cetera. We learned some interesting things. We've heard different things than we might hear from some service providers in terms of their hopes and desires and their desire, for example, to move on from supportive housing to regular affordable housing. And that spawned some different programs and moving on initiative. But more importantly, there was a great idea that came from a grantee. It was actually from somebody at CSH, Molly Reisman, who was the director in LA at that time, who said, we really need to help in our advocacy and policy work, which we support CSH and others to help residents and people who've overcome homelessness to be advocates. And so CSH has developed this Speak Up program, community advocates program, and I have to say it's one of the most exciting things that we have supported. And I think philanthropy has been doing this with involving youth and talking about school issues, et cetera. We're a little late to the table, but it's incredibly exciting. And we've had several iterations where these people who, again, know much more about how to overcome homelessness than me or most of us who haven't experienced homelessness are becoming advocates, speaking, meeting with legislators, meeting with business people to not just talk about, sometimes people are brought out to help raise funds, et cetera. It's much more than that. And it really changes the conversation. So we have had, and it's helped us communicate better. We've had people come to our office. We've had videos interviewing people. And I'm happy that one of those persons here, Dorothy Edwards, is here. I won't embarrass her by asking her to stand up. But if you get a chance to meet Dorothy, and I know there are other tenants here, I encourage you to talk to them. I had a conversation with her, and I always learn something from her. And she travels with me. So one thing is now when I talk, I was in Florida several months ago. I was talking to the RAND Corporation a couple months ago. Rather than me just talking about homelessness, what happens, she's there in the video and sharing her experience. And every time, that's the thing people mention. Wow, that was so powerful to see what that means. And you know, now Dorothy's living it out as a caseworker with one of our great grantees that actually helped her overcome her homelessness. Housing Works. And she's also Deb's boss. She's on the board of CSH. Yeah. So it really has changed. And just a couple weeks ago, we had a group that went up to Sacramento and was doing advocacy around housing affordability and policy. If you're interested in that, if you know Mark Horvath, Invisible People, he was there, has some videos on his website, on Twitter, that really show, again, the power of supportive housing and all the system changes that we're making.
Great. Michelle, is this work getting harder or easier?
A little of both. I know that's an easy answer, right? I would say where it's getting easier is that more and more people really, to Arthur's point, get the value of supportive housing. So you don't have to go in and walk into someplace and explain what supportive housing is like you used to. Mm-hmm. So there are more interested parties looking and saying, we know what it is in general, we're not experts at it, but what can we do? And so there's a lot more openness to it. Ironically, that openness to not only serve and use supportive housing for this a growing number of populations, it's at the same time that really resources are becoming more and more constrained. And that is the hard part. You know, when we started doing our supportive housing program, the city of Columbus and our county literally had set aside millions of dollars for a 5-year commitment to take all their home monies and dedicate a vast majority of them to projects that came along and did the Housing First model. So you walk in, if you've got a good project, you had resources that came to the table. Mm-hmm. Well, home monies, as we know, have been decimated over the last 5 years. So is CDBG and a lot of the other programs. So getting the model financially to work in this constrained environment of money is interesting because it's the same time where so many people are desperately looking to use the Housing First and supportive housing models. And so I guess in the end, I guess that's what we get paid to do is we're paid to do the heavy lift, right? If we believe it and there's a growing movement around it, it's ours to take that heavy lift and make sure that the resources are directed in the right place.
So that's a perfect segue to my last question. Tomorrow, at the end of the summit, we have a panel of folks from federal agencies. So here's your chance to ask a question of our federal partners or tell us what you would hope the federal partners would prioritize.
Is this for all of us?
It's for all of you.
Okay.
No, it's for you.
He's got the wittiest answer, so I think you should go first. We'll pay you.
Okay. Well, I don't know what I would say, but I think, and I loved your comments earlier today, this morning. I think that the challenge is connecting the dots for people. Because I'm a part of government, and my counterparts in this case are the police commissioner, fire commissioner, school superintendent, library commissioner. My strategy has been, how do I integrate what I do into what they're doing? So I don't come to them from the perspective of, I think you should pay attention to behavioral health. I come to them and I have a different conversation, which is, I know you're trying to achieve X, and I know that one of the things that gets in the way are behavioral health, untreated behavioral health issues. If we partner together, we can help address those issues and it'll help you achieve your mission. I think that's a much better way to have this conversation. I think leading with supportive housing is important and everyone should do it, I don't think is the right frame. I think the right frame is, I know you're trying to do something that's really important. I think I have something that can help you achieve that. If we partner, you can do that. And so I think it's a way to end. And I think for federal agencies that have their own agendas, I think if we can begin helping people to see how to connect those dots, I think people are much more likely to embrace what we're trying to promote.
Great, thanks, Arthur. Anyone else?
Sure, I'll go ahead.
I was going to say, got 18 months or something to a new administration. What, countdown, what do we need to do in this time to make sure that the progress, no matter who, comes in, continues? Some of the people in those agencies will remain there, but how can we be supportive of continuing and advancing so that the solutions we've been working toward continue to accelerate? So I find sometimes there's a hesitancy, politics, or in the case of coming to philanthropy, money, we don't want to be perceived as asking for money. Well, it doesn't have to be about that. It can be how can we be supportive through our grant making as funders, through the great work that local government providers are doing, and advocacy. I mean, we have great advocates out there too.
I think I'll go back to what David said, that I think the government doesn't have the money right now. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure to constrain. So I guess what I would say, one of the best things they can do is continue their efforts that I've seen somewhat, but that is about trying to reduce barriers. So often, the barriers of the different silos of government, whether it's CMS to HUD or VA to CMS or whatever the case may be, those barriers are often constrain some of the innovations that are trying to be done at the local level, at the state level and at the city levels. And the more they can try to find ways to bring those barriers down so that some of the ways that we can try to create money-saving initiatives will be really helpful. And often that can really be a problem.
David.
At the risk of maybe going just like too much inside baseball, I think that there's not much the feds can provide right now, except for maybe this thing around Medicaid, and I think that's still something that is a long shot, but potentially achievable. But aside from that, I think that right now, I think the administration is actually looking more to secure its legacy policy achievements. So the ACA is kind of a big deal, and I think that the story and here it's kind of a John Kennedy thing, like ask not what your country can do for you, what can you do for the ACA, and provide stories that kind of counter the narrative, because that's actually still going on, and I think that this room is full of narratives about how we can actually find value in the healthcare system. And that story just needs to be, told again and again and again. And you have not just like, I don't know, random stories. This is a big story, and I think that to the extent that we can really roll it up into a really strong story, that will really be important. And the administration is looking for stuff like that, I think, at this point, because there's really only months, before the end of the administration, and so that preserving that legacy is going to be, among other, it'll be one of the things that they're concerned about, because right now the feds really can't provide too much, and I don't know if there's any other big sort of policy opportunities, but so that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Great, thank you. Nance.
So I think a lot of progress has been made these last few years. That this administration has opened up many opportunities, obviously with the ACA, but also with their emphasis on innovation and pay for success. And I think I think we need to keep those doors open, continue to break down those silos and take advantage of those opportunities.
Great. Well, thank you. How about a round of applause for our panelists this morning? Thank you so much. And Liz, just folks move on to the next breakout session, correct? Thank you all.